finance.com. In this video, I'm going to talk about open interest and basics on open interest and introduction to how the open interest changes, how it goes up, how it comes down, when does the open interest stay the same even though there is a trade that is going on. So we'll discuss just those aspects and not about the price analysis or how to predict the price based on it. So this is just be a basic introduction video, and I'm gonna take futures first as the example because options is a little bit more complicated, wherein there are two types of contracts: call option, put option, and various strike prices. And there are n number of contracts for Nifty alone, and similarly for Bank Nifty, and similarly for specific stocks. In case of futures, there's only one type of contract, and there are two sides, or there are two players in the contract. One is the buyer, the other is the seller, and there are like two sides of the coin, just like a husband and wife. So the contract is, or the agreement is actually framed between the buyer and the seller, where they are both tied down against each other. The buyer plays against the seller, and the seller plays against the buyer. So they are both betting against each other in this case actually, and the buyer's profit comes from the seller's loss, and the buyer's loss comes from the seller's profits. So one vice versa. So basically, in terms of futures, in both the buyer and seller account, a margin amount is needed, because by definition and by nature of the futures contract, there's unlimited loss scenario for both the buyer as well as the seller. So a margin amount is locked to enter into a futures contract either as a buyer or as a seller. The buyer is said to be going long and the seller is said to be going short, wherein when the buyer is predicting that the buyer will gain if the price goes up, the seller will gain if the price goes down from the time of entry. So in this case, it's actually a contract getting formed between the buyer and seller. So it's like I said, it's more like a marriage between a male and a female. And let's check when the open interest goes up and goes down. So this is a scenario wherein I'm saying here that the open interest is increasing, wherein there is a new buyer coming in with cash in his account, and he's placing a buy order. Similarly, at the same time, there's a new seller who's coming in and he's placing a short order with just cash in hand, and he's placing a shorting order. And when the trade gets executed between a new buyer and a new seller, the open interest goes up by the quantity that they're both placing, assuming equal quantity of buyers and equal quantity of seller is getting executed. The open interest goes up. It's more like a young boy getting married to a young girl. So let's say a village has around 50 couples, and 50 couples means, or the current open interest is 50 couples. So there are 50 husbands and 50 wives in a village, and then two new young boys and two new young girls are coming and they are getting married to each other. So the open interest goes up by 2 because the number of couples now become 52 from 50. So it's more like that, wherein a new buyer comes in and a new seller comes in and the contract is getting formed between them. The open interest goes up. Okay. And I'm just giving the example of marriage between a male and a female to make you understand the count of couples that are already there in the village, and how the number of married couples go up and come down. The same happens in open interest. So I'm taking the example of marriage here, and here is an example where the open interest decreases. So in this case, there's an existing buyer and an existing seller, meaning they got married, the husband and wife, and now they decide to get divorced. They file for divorce, and their status goes from married to single. So in that case, what happens is the number of couples in the village will come down, assuming the existing couple count is 50, and then one husband and wife are filing for a divorce, and they're both getting divorced, and they're going their separate ways. So in that case, the number of couples in the village will come down by one from 50 to 49. So that's an example where the open interest will come down. And in actual case, in terms of futures, the existing buyer and existing seller, they are both exiting the contract against each other. They're squaring off. When the new buyer and a new seller came in, a fresh contract was created. But when they decide to square off, both the sides, they decide to square off against each other again, the open interest will go down. So in this case, the existing buyer who is holding, let's say in case of Nifty, the lot size is 25 now, he will be holding plus 25. The guy who went short will be holding minus 25, will be his net positions. When they both square off, the net positions for both of them will become zero. The existing buyer will place a sell order. The existing short, or the guy who went short, will be placing a buy order to square off. And when those two execute again, trade against each other again, and the open interest will come down by one. So this is an example when the open interest will come down. And I'll give you a scenario where the open interest will stay the same. At the top you can see open interest unchanged, and here let's see what happens. You can see that there is an existing buyer by name A, and a new buyer comes in and replaces the position of A, wherein the existing buyer will place a to sell or square off his positions. He'll place a sell order, and when a new buyer comes into the system wherein he has cash in his account and he's willing to get into the long position, so B takes the place of A, and in this case, when the trade happens between A and B, the open interest will stay the same. It will remain the same and it will not change. Similarly, there is a seller by name C. Initially, the contract was getting formed between A and C, and this guy decides to square off his position or his short position. So he'll place a buy order, and the seller D, who is a new seller, he takes the position. He'll replace the position of C and he'll take his place, and he will place a shorting order or a sell order, and the trade will get executed between C and D, and D will take the place of C, and C will square off and take the cash back home. And again, in this case, A will take the cash back home, meaning he'll exit his positions and he will take whatever cash is left and he'll take it back home. And now what will happen is the contract will exist between B and D. So the open interest will stay the same and it will not change at all. So it's more like, let's say there is a husband and a wife, and the wife gets killed in an accident, and then the husband gets married to a new wife. Then the number of couples stays same in the village. There is no change. It's just that the wife got killed, and the buyer become a widow, and immediately, let's say, a new wife comes in and replaces the old wife. So again, this is not to create any controversy, but just for the sake of example or explanation. So in that case, it's just that the existing wife, she died in an accident, and then a new wife comes in and replaces the first wife, and the number of couple will stay the same. And the same goes true if the husband dies in an accident and then a new husband takes the place and he marries the widowed wife immediately. So in that case, again, the number of couples will stay the same, so the open interest will not change. I hope now you understand the three scenarios when the open interest will go up, when the open interest will come down, and when the open interest will stay the same. Okay? So some points to note here are that if the open interest increases, it does not mean that whether the buyer is right or whether the seller is wrong. It's more like between a husband and wife, the husband can be right, the wife can be right, and they can both keep making mistakes. So it just means when the open interest goes up, it just means that this huge amount of trading interest in that particular stock or commodity, and there's a sudden rise, let's say there's a sudden rise in number of couples in a village, it just means that the population is growing, and the population of couples in the village is growing. And similarly, in case of stock, the things will change between futures and options, and why a open interest goes up at a particular level in options, especially towards expiry. The out of the money contracts, the sellers are mostly right, and if there is an increase in open interest in the out of the money, it just means that Nifty will probably not cross those levels by expiry. And all that need not be always true. So there's always ifs and buts, and open interest alone is not gonna give you a clear picture. So you gotta actually analyze other aspects like support and resistance, whether there is further upside possible or further downside possible. What is the Nifty trend? What is the stock trend? And whether stock going up will get supported by Nifty staying on the uptrend, and those sort of questions arise. So I'll not cover that in this video, so I'll try and cover those topics in a later video. So in this video I just want to cover the points like when the open interest will go up, when it will come down, and when it will stay the same. Now I'll show you the options chart. Here you can see that in options there will be various strike prices or various bidding levels, meaning for Nifty itself in the current month expiry there will be at least 20 different strike prices, and there will be 40 contracts, 20 call option contracts, and at each strike price there will be a call option contract as well as a put option contract. So there will be at least 40 contracts which will get actively traded. So coming down, you can see that the call option will have a buyer as well as a seller. I have indicated here as B and S. Similarly, the put option contract will also have a buyer and a seller, and in this case the contract is getting formed between the call option buyer and a call option seller at a particular strike price. And similarly, the contract gets formed between the put option buyer and the put option seller at a particular strike price. And in case of options, for a call option or a put option, for a buyer there is no need for margins because he is paying the entire premium upfront, and the maximum value that our options premium can go down to is 0. So he pays the entire amount that he can lose, so there's no margin for a buyer. But for a seller, margin is locked because there is an unlimited loss making scenario, so a margin is getting locked. And for a buyer there's no unlimited loss scenario, the loss is fixed, so there's no margin that gets blocked. And there's no actual relation between the buyers and sellers of call option and put option at a particular strike price. It's locked because there is an unlimited loss making scenario, so a margin is getting locked. And for a buyer there's no unlimited loss scenario, the loss is fixed, so there's no margin that gets blocked. And there's no actual relation between the buyers and sellers of call option and put option at a particular strike price. They are both two different types of contracts, wherein the buyer in the call option will expect Nifty to cross that particular strike price by end of expiry. The put option is just exactly the opposite, wherein the buyer of a put option will expect Nifty to drop below that particular strike price. So which is why, again, by definition, in out of the money contracts or far away contracts, for both call option and put option, sellers are normally right, especially as the time gets closer to expiry. So I'll try and make separate videos on how to analyze or how to make use of open interest once I have some clear data and examples to provide. So in this video I just want to explain how the open interest will go up, how it will come down, and when it stays the same. Okay, so any questions or queries you can post on this video and I'll get back to you. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and join our trading group and get a free training session.